Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Sunday morning live stream of underappreciated vintage video games. Let me know if you're there, if you're watching. I'm just faffing around with my microphone. As per usual, because it's a Sunday morning, I'm not entirely completely finished with my setup this morning, so sorry about that. But yeah. The game that I want to talk about today is a game called Cat Trax for the Hanimex HMG 2650. For those that didn't see the stream last weekend, I kind of went through a little potted history of the Hanimex and the fact that it's a clone. Hey, Mike, good to see you this morning. Yeah, and I'm not going to go over all that stuff again. I've been doing a little bit more digging. I looked at Space Attack a little bit more. So Space Attack was the game that I looked at last week and showed that there's quite a significant difference between the original Emerson version and the Hanimex version that was released for this clone. And that the Hanimex version is a far better game. It fixes some of the collision detection issues with the first one. It gets rid of the energy bar that counts down and makes it virtually impossible to complete a wave without dying. And it has an extra mode that pretty much doubles the speed of it and makes for a much more engaging and harder game. So all three of those enhancements make quite a big difference to the original game. And so I did a little bit more digging on that. First of all, as I kind of thought about this afterwards, because I said last week that they're completely compatible with each other. But that's really odd because the Hanimex obviously is a PAL console and the Emerson is a NTSC console. And so the games should have different palettes and they should also run at different speeds, right? NTSC is a 60 frame per second game and PAL is 50 frames per second. So obviously, the processor is not running at those speeds, but the video frame rate is running at those speeds. And so if you run an NTSC game that's designed for 60 frames on a 50 frame PAL unit, are you getting weird timing issues? And are those timing issues responsible for the collision detection glitches and potentially also the fact that the energy bar runs down so quickly you can't complete a level? So those were kind of, interesting hypotheses. Obviously, I mean, there are other consoles that you can run PAL cartridges on NTSC machines, and they, some of them work without issue, and some of them glitch and don't work at all, and some of them have different palettes and this kind of thing. But the palette seems to be the same. Looking at video footage of the original game on the Emerson, it looks identical. But what I did do is I installed an emulator and I played Space Attack, the original. The ROMs say they are US/EU, which is kind of odd. So the same ROM runs on, it's for both markets for one thing. But I did discover some interesting things about it. First of all, there seem to be 3 versions of the ROM in circulation. So obviously last week I was talking about how Space Attack is different for Emerson as it is for Hanimex, and I presumed that the Emerson version would be version 1 and the Hanimex would be like a second or third version of it, because I'd seen reference to the fact that there were 3 versions of this game. And sure enough, when I installed the emulator, I found 3 ROMs for this game, which presumably correspond to versions 1, 2, and 3. But the first 2 ROMs were different versions of the Emerson game with the energy bar. The first one ran quite slow and had some glitches, and the second one, which is labeled as an alternative ROM, ran faster, but the collision detection was virtually broken. Or in fact, the collision detection worked for the enemies above the star field when they enter into their Galaxian formation at the top. But then as they come down the screen, the collision detection was really poor. So you've got the choice of both of which had the energy bar, and both of which had 2 game modes, 1 player play one player mode and one demo mode. So just like the Emerson one. So you've got a choice of playing either a slow, slightly broken version of the game or a faster, completely broken version of the game. But the third alternative ROM that I found was actually labeled Proto, so presumably as a prototype ROM, and that ROM was essentially the Hanimex game. So no energy bar, 2 game modes, game mode A and game mode B, ran faster, and was exactly the same as the Hanimex version, except there was no collision detection on enemy spaceships when they reached the starfield. So it's like a prototype version of the good PAL version of the game. And those are the 3 ROMs that are in circulation. So, I mean, the plot thickens. What is the timeline here? Is it that there's 2 versions, both of which are slightly broken, of the original Emerson game, and then there's only a prototype version of Space Attack, the PAL version, has ever been dumped, and no one has actually ever dumped the proper PAL version of the game, which has, you know, as we saw last week, runs a treat. How peculiar. I hope someone out there who is much more of a specialist in these consoles and knows more of the history of Emerson and this family of consoles can lend some help and try and clear this up, because it's a bit of a mystery. And it's really interesting that the best version of the game doesn't seem to be available anywhere. If that really is true, very peculiar. I may be totally wrong. Those ROMs were the ones that were in the dump that exists on the Internet Archive, and as far as I could tell, was kind of the representative set of game ROMs for the Emerson machine. There may be another dump of ROMs for Hanimex. I didn't find it. I didn't look particularly hard. Yeah, definitely need to track down someone who knows. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Hopefully, through the power of the network, this video will find its way to someone who, dedicates more of their time to archiving this particular video game series and can clear some of this stuff up. Anyway, so yeah, those are the things. The other thing that I wanted to talk about quickly is that I haven't figured out what bitrate to set my stream at to best capture these games, because I noticed watching the stream back from last week that the game was quite flickery, or was flickery at different moments of the game and seemed to change the smoothness changed, and I'm pretty sure that's because my frame rate is not syncing up with the frame rate of the game. So it's probably running at a multiple of 30, whereas the game obviously runs at a multiple of 25/50. And so I need to figure out how to change the frame rate so that it outputs at a multiple of 50. But the thing that I don't really understand about this is if the machine is putting out 50 frames per second and I'm putting out 50 frames per second, is that going to make the image smooth most of the time? But if it happens to sync up when the image is blanking, do I run the risk of it then just putting out nothing at all occasionally? Obviously, if it's out of sync, then it'll kind of sort of come in and out and in and out. But if it's completely in sync, do I run the risk of syncing basically with the blank signal? Or is that just, should I not even worry about that? I don't know. I don't know enough about these things. But anyway, you can control the bit rate in StreamLabs, but I haven't quite figured out how to relate the bit rate to the frames per second to make sure that it's a multiple of 50. And obviously, I don't really want to stream at 100 frames per second, so I'm not sure my laptop is going to handle that. Does the box I'm running the video into not hold the last frame? Well, if it did, then why is the image so flickery? Because looking back at the footage from last week, playing Space Attack, as the enemy ships come down the screen, on the video they flicker, whereas on the real console they're completely smooth. They come down nice and smoothly. There's no console flicker. So I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not that at all. Maybe there's really nothing I can do about it, and it's nothing to do with the bit rate of my stream. But yeah, certainly I found in the past, if you watch a stream back at a lower quality, you get quite a lot of flicker. You know, sometimes I've seen other people's videos to the point where you can't see anything happening on screen, or you know you know, all the static stuff is there, but none of the moving sprites are there. All the sprites disappear until you change it to a higher frame rate, and then they come back. So I presume it's something to do with that. Anyway, I still need to experiment with that. So hopefully I have actually changed the bit rate for this stream. So hopefully you can all see the game that I'm about to play. There is a danger that I've messed it up. Yeah, it is something to experiment with. Thanks, Lee. Okay, right. Anyway, just for those who weren't here last week, let me just show. Let me just, if I can remember which button it is. I think it's this one here. This is the machine that I'm going to be playing on today. So let me just pick this up. You can see it. So this is Hanimex HMG 2650 video console. There we go. Color television game system. This was released. So the original version of this, the one by Emerson, was released in May 1982. I presume the Hanimex came out later that year. One of the things I love about this, actually, I'm just going to show this quickly. I mean, there's lots of things that I like about this console. I kind of went over them last week, but I don't know if you can see that. But if you look carefully, just at the top of the controller there, it says Visual Adventures. Now, some of these controllers say Visual Adventures. This particular model says Visual Adventures on the controller, on both controllers. But some of these, I've got another one, and it says Adventures in Television. I just think that's great. Adventures in Television. Probably silly question. There's not an option to have the auto detect the bit rate for the console you're using. I wish there was. I mean, maybe there is, but I just don't know about it. Yeah, I need to dig into this more. Like I would have kind of hoped that in the settings there would be a setting to just say what frame rate you want to put out, rather than bit rate, which then you have to kind of, the bit rate obviously depends on the resolution you're putting out and the number of frames per second, then you have to calculate it. And the calculation doesn't seem as straightforward as just multiplying them either. So anyway, there is definitely something to experiment with there. I'm hoping what I have noticed is that you can set the record quality to match the stream quality. So I can test it by basically doing recordings, and then watching those back and seeing if they look any better or not. But I haven't had time to test any of that stuff. Anyway, so let's have a little bit of a play with one of Hanimex's Adventures in Television. I prefer Adventures in Television. Visual Adventures, I don't know which came first. Was it Visual Adventures and someone said, hey, that's crap, it should be Adventures in Television? Or did someone say, oh, Adventures in Television, that sounds really old-fashioned. This is about computers in the future, not about televisions. Let's call it Visual Adventures. I have no idea. If anybody's got any Emersons out there, have a look at your controllers and tell me what the Emersons say, and the Schmitz, and the Soundix, and all of the other. There's like 30 different clones of this machine that were made for different markets around the world. I'd love to know what they say on the controller. Anyway, right, let's have a look at this game. So let me do that, and I can bring the console up down there. There we go. So you can see that okay. So yeah, so this game that I want to show is Cat Trax, and I don't know very much about it. it's cartridge number 24, so it's fairly late on in the run for this console. As I said last week, I think only 35 games were ever made for it. Is there a date? Yeah, it's 82. So all of this came out in 82. So somehow they managed to release the original Emerson console, which came out in May, and a whole bunch of clones, including this Hanimex one that was converted to PAL, and all of these games in the same year. So we shouldn't really be surprised. We're looking at a bit of history here, and it's just condensed into barely 8 or 9 months of programming and marketing, and I mean, if you look at the box art on these things, they're just rough sketches. I saw a conversation on one of the forums about this art, and someone was saying, if you were a professional artist, you wouldn't expect to spend more than an hour on each of these drawings. They're just rough pencil sketches, barely inked in, and then gone over, filled out with an acrylic pen. Better launch lineup than the PS5, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, each of these games is like, barely a sprint's worth of time. They produce an entire game. So anyway, what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that we can't expect too much from these machines, from these games. That was the other thing that I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to show you this. This is an insert. So this is a little kind of plasticated card that fits into the controller, and it says right, so it goes into the right controller, and on this size it says freeze, and on that size it says unfreeze. So this is the pause feature, and actually I did discover, even though it doesn't say it in the manual for Space Attack, there was, for the American one, an addendum. There was an extra little piece of paper inserted into the game box that included the freeze feature. So Space Attack does have a freeze feature, even though it uses the right-hand controller. It actually has a freeze on the left-hand controller. So we'll try this out. I've put the I don't know if you can see this. Let me you can see that in the small monitor. Let me stick it in the top one. There you go. So if you can see that, I've now put the insert into the right-hand controller. I'm going to put the controller back in its little slot. So I now have pause and play functions on the controller over there. So that was a thing. Right. Now the other thing I have are a series of game modes. So we're going to try some of the game modes out, but before we do that, I'm just going to start. Actually, there should be another insert. There is a left controller insert that gives me the ability to open and close gates and warp. Okay, so let's bear that in mind. But first off, let's do that. Let's give this game a little go. So as you can see, this is a Pac Man clone, obviously, and there were an absolute ton of Pac Man clones at the time. And as we talked about last week, the intention was to release this console with a whole load of arcade classics on it, and then they got either sued or threatened